ज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुं दीनतारिणं। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। पञ्चकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। कालवृत्या तु मायायां गुणमायाम् अधोक्षजः पुरुषेणात्मभूतेन वीर्यमाधत्त वीर्यवान्। The Supreme Living Being in his features, the Transcendental Purusha Incarnation, who is the Lord's plenary expansion, impregnates the material nature of three modes, and thus, by the influence of material time, the living entities appear. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains this. Kalavritya is initial action of time as meaning at the initial moment of inhalation and exhalation of the Mahapurusha. So the Mahapurusha, Karanavashaya Vishnu, exhales and universes are manifested, and there's Garbhodakshaya Vishnus inside those universes, and from their navels sprout beautiful transcendental lotus flowers which open, and there is the original entity in that universe, Brahma, and he goes about the mechanics. He sets everything up. But all this, the point here though, is that all this is happening by the arrangement of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That even the Karanarnavashaya Vishnu is an expansion, a plenary expansion. So he's got 6 opulences, and he's Vishnu, he's Vishnu Tattva. So he has 60 of the 64 qualities that through which Krishna attracts all the living entities. These are described in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu as, I don't remember if they're deep enough, but they're one of the things that sparks our interest in the Lord, our attraction to the Lord. And this is all happening by Krishna's arrangement through the facility of his inconceivable energies, one of which is the material energy consisting of the 3 modes of material nature. And the way it happens is referred to here as a mystery. This is the mystery of the generation of the living entities. We can try to understand it. We can try to see if we can grasp it to some extent. But the fact is that the absolute truth just won't fit in the grasp of our little mind. We can't understand. Well, maybe we can take a biology class and think we have some sense of how our fingernails and hair are growing. But what do we really know? All we know is that every week, and for me, it's usually on Ekadashi, when I realize, I should have cut my nails yesterday. Because all I can think about that day is my fingernails. But all we know is that every week or so, we gotta cut them back. And sometimes, especially if you're a kid like we were, my brother and sister and I, you need one of those little fingernail brushes to get this, get the dirt out of your cuticles and from under your nails and stuff. But we don't know how they work. We don't know how our digestion works. We have some sense, but we don't really know. I mean, how is it that we eat some food and the energy in that food gets transformed into energy that powers our body, that makes certain different things happen in our body. And cells get active and they create other cells, and all these things happen. Nobody can really kind of keep their thumb on the whole thing at once. And all of a sudden we're talking about the universe, and we think we can get that figured out. But the fact is, if we really, if we want to enter into transcendence, we have to be willing to embrace mystery. We have to be willing to not just own, but embrace the fact that we can't really figure everything out. In the purport, the Lord's referred to as a hokshata. That means he's beyond the ken of our mind and senses. And so how this is happening is a great mystery. But one big point that Srila Prabhupada wants to make in this is not some mechanistic arrangement like we see under the purview of the three modes of material nature. That if we want to generate, want to create other living entities, you can't just go cook them up in the kitchen. Now, you may find living entities who proliferate, just like with my sourdough starter. I'm not creating anybody, but these things are happening by the interaction of the modes of material nature. I put some ingredients together and hope I don't forget about it for too long, so I don't have to start all over again. But it's not like that with the Lord. He thinks, okay, in order to enjoy exchanges of love with others, let me be many. That's how the Vedas describe it. And so and then some of those many somehow or other end up in a situation where they desire a sort of independent life. Okay, so there has to be an arrangement made for them, so there's not a disturbance to the others who are willing to kind of go along with things the way they could be ideally. So, you've got this other nature. Krishna has aparasya shakti vividhaya shruyate. The Vedas described that he has multitudinous energies. They're different, a number of different energies. They're broadly categorized in three: his Swarupa Shakti, his internal energy, Antaranga Shakti, his Bahiranga Shakti, or Maya Shakti, which is his external energy, which is this stuff, which is jada, dead, inert. And then something in between, something quite mystical. That's us, jivas, who are a tatastha Shakti. A tata is that area of a body of water, whether it's a river, a lake, ocean, whatever, that sometimes is covered by water and sometimes is exposed to the air. Sometimes it's dry land, sometimes it's ocean. On the oceans we call it the littoral zone. There was another name that I learned when I was in intelligence school in the Navy, and it escapes me, but I remember it wasn't the littoral zone, it was something else, some technical thing. And so there's that area. And that's our situation. We're tata. We're situated on that tata, which means we're very prone to being influenced by our environment. So if we're in an environment dominated by the three modes of material nature, because we're unu, because we're small, we have a tendency to identify with that material nature. So we think, I'm a woman, I'm a man, I'm American, I'm Filipino, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, whatever it is. You know, these are all upadhis, all labels that we assume. We actually kind of create these identities based on our environment, and we behave accordingly. We act like we're one of those, but we're not, because those things change. Even even our political sentiments can change. What was it Churchill said? Anybody who isn't a socialist when he's 20 has no heart, and who hasn't given that up by the time he's 40 has no head. So our political sentiments change, our religions change. I was born in a Methodist family, and for a few years I went to a Presbyterian church, and then I went to a Methodist church again, partly because it was right next door. And then I went to an Episcopal church and became an Episcopalian. You can see my dog tags. It says Episc, where they ask for your religion. That's something that had changed a couple of times by the time I was 19. No, by the time I was 15 or 16. People changed their gender. And it's not something that we've invented in the 21st century, but you read about it in the Mahabharata. A number of characters who shift genders, or become, or maybe are gender fluid even, in that story. So we change all this stuff. We identify so strongly with it. I'm an old American man, and you people are destroying my country, and all of a sudden I'm an ant in China. You know, so how American was I? How outraged was I really? And all of a sudden, I don't have any sense of that at all. All I can think of is sugar. And somehow or other, if there's a particle of sugar 35 miles away, I know it's there, and I've got to get it and bring it back for the hive. And that becomes my dharma. I'm an ant. I'm a worker ant, and I haul stuff that weighs 300 times as much as I do. But that's, anyway. So the big thing here is Krishna does it, at least figuratively, by his glance. He just kind of thinks, let me become many. And by acknowledging the material nature, then all this stuff, all these things come into being. And this happens by his inconceivable potencies. Srila Prabhupada refers us in his purport to a couple of verses. One is the 32nd verse. Oh dear, I don't know how I did that. 32nd verse of the 5th chapter of the Brahma Samhita. Angani yasya sakalendriya viddimanti Ashyanti panti kalayantam chiram jagankam. Long commentaries. Really long commentaries. Angani yasya sakalendriya vrittimanti pashyanti panti kalayanti chiram jaganti. Ananda chinmaya sarujjvala vigrahasya govinda maripurusham talmam bhajami. He says, Brahma says, I worship the Supreme Lord Govinda, whose individual limbs possessing the functions of all the senses. In other words, their functions are interchangeable. He can do, he can eat with his eyes, right? He can eat with it. We offer this nice food to him, and maybe if Markandeya were to sneak in there, he'd find them sitting on those little cushions he put out. But we're generally not able to see that. So we at least accept that he can accept the offerings with his eyes. Forever creating, maintaining, and annihilating the worlds, because those attractive limbs are made of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. So, he has these inconceivable energies. He's the Lord of all inconceivable energies. And then the other verse Srila Prabhupada cites is the third verse of chapter 14 of the Bhagavad Gita. Mama Jyonir Mahad Brahma Tasmin Garbham Dadhamyam Sambhava Sarva Bhutanam Tato Bhavati Bhavata. The total material substance called Brahman is the source of birth, and it is that Brahman I impregnate, making possible the births of all living beings, O son of Bharata. And Srila Prabhupada said, this is an explanation of the world. Everything that takes place is due to the combination of Kshetra and Kshetrajna, the body and the spirit soul. There's life, there appears to be life in this world because of the interaction of the jiva with inert matter. The inert matter is not going to do anything on its own. This phone's not supposed to do anything I don't tell it to. Somehow or other the screen dims, even though I have the settings turned off and the screen turned off and I'm not touching it. The next time I turn it on, the screen might be half as bright as I intended it to be. I don't know how that happens. Another mystery. But generally, the phone doesn't do anything until I tell it to. I say, oh, hey, Siri. And sometimes Siri has an answer for me, sometimes she doesn't, often it's not. And she did have an answer the other day, didn't she, Irina? We asked, and she had like the right, I don't remember
the color of the blood.
Pardon?
The color of the blood.
Oh, yeah. So she gave the answer that we wanted, so we celebrated that. But our computers, our phones, our cars, these things seem alive. They come to life when we effect that, when we bring that about. You get into the car and you turn the key, or nowadays you press a button, or like with Prius, you don't, and maybe other cars as well. You don't even have to do that. You just have to have your little electronic key on you. You get in the car and everything's ready to roll. All you have to do is put her in gear. But that's effected by consciousness, by my presence, by the living entity, under my direction. So everything in the material world is going on, either directly or indirectly, takes place by the will of the Lord. And our business as living entities is to try to, especially living entities who've attained the very rare human form of life. Where did I hear that yesterday? Oh, in the kitchen. I think I overheard Nagapatni speaking to someone on the phone, and she was emphasizing how rare the human form of life is, and how we need to take that seriously, take advantage of it while we can, strike while the iron is hot. And so Srila Prabhupada mentions at the end of the purport is that we, if we don't come to our senses, then again, we're going to go into this long period of suspended animation. When Karnadakshai Vishnu is breathing in, and everything becomes unmanifest, and we don't, our consciousness, our ability to be aware, is also not manifest, because that's the environment we find ourselves in at that time. It's a really long time. We don't figure it. But the thing is, whether we're aware of it or not, we're missing out on being able to exchange love with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, so that's a big part of the point that's being made in this verse. That Krishna is the Supreme Controller, we're His eternal servants, and our business as human beings is to take advantage of the opportunities when they afford themselves to awaken our consciousness. What is it? How does it Srila Prabhupada say? Come to our senses. Come to our senses, our actual spiritual senses, and act in our identity as pure consciousness in an eternal loving relationship with Krishna. And so that's why we get together and hear Srimad Bhagavatam together, to bring about that awakening. Come once again to our senses and enter into spiritual consciousness, otherwise known as going back home, back to Godhead. Any quick questions or comments?
Maharaj, if you could explain a little bit where these living entities are coming from, that Krishna is impregnating the universe with.
Him. The living entities are that marginal energy, and they enter the material universes originally through the body of Mahavishnu. But ultimately everything comes from him. The chapters that we're reading in Chaitanya Charitamrita, chapter 5 and chapter 6, we get a pretty good explanation, pretty detailed explanation of how even the spiritual universes come about, but they all originally come from Krishna. They rest in Krishna. And it says that also in the Bhagavad Gita. How it is, it's really technical. There are different explanations for it. And certainly, if you were to survey the different cultures of this world, you'd find any number of explanations. I remember in Montessori education, Montessori elementary education, beginning the first 3 years, one of the things that they do is explore different creation stories from around the world, because that helps us get a sense of who different peoples think they are. So our creation story in modern times is that we come from matter, or the cartoon version is that we're descended from apes. But other cultures figure they're descended from gods. And that would certainly be a more Vedic explanation, but also we see in Hawaiian creation stories, we see in the Kundalini, everyone comes from gods. Everything and everyone comes from these different gods. And so, ultimately, we all come from Krishna. And those who are destined to manifest themselves in the material world rest in the body of Mahavishnu when he's not exhaling, and then become manifested again, become apparent again when he exhales. Now, if you care to fluff that out a little bit, feel free.
Well, I heard you mention the creation of the spiritual universe. So, are those going on as well?
They're always going on, but they come from Krishna.
Is there any dissolution of spiritual universe?
There's no influence of no influence of the material. There's the material energy in the spiritual realm, and I think it would be not quite accurate to think of it in terms of a geographical place, as we may be prone to.
Yeah.
It's not like Kaneohe, you know, instead of Ha'ula or something like that. But there are realms of existence, planes of existence. And even this place isn't as we seem to perceive it. And we don't even know that each of us is perceiving it really the same. I mean, we see so many things differently. Just in our kind of like everyday existence. But no, in the spiritual realm, there is no creation or dissolution. There are no cycles. Time doesn't even exist as we can conceive it. You know, I mean, in our Western cultures, we think of time as some sort of linear thing. So we think of a creation and then an end. But, you know, even time in this world, most cultures don't think of it in that linear way. That kind of comes from the Greeks and the Christians, I think. Most cultures think of it in cyclical terms, just like we experience every day. The sun comes up, reaches its zenith, and then it sets, and then we have a few hours of darkness, and the sun comes up again. And then the moon changes a little bit every day. When it gets full, when it rises about the same time the sun sets, and it's really huge on the horizon. And then it wanes and disappears for half the month and starts to come back. We see that cycle, and then we see the cycle of the seasons. And we compare our lives to seasons, at least poetically. So even time, you know, isn't exactly as we seem to represent it. And I think that's one reason I'm drawn more to analog clocks than digital clocks. For one thing, you know, you see the cycle. It's 8:30 now, and it's going to be 8:30 again in 12 hours, and then in 24 hours it'll be 8:30 tomorrow, and Kusha will be winding up her class. So, you know, we see that, but if we look at a digital watch, we don't see the relationship, you know, of 8:30 with noon or anything like that. Alexander.
Hare Krishna. So you were saying how Krishna and his energies, his potencies are like inconceivable. And we also know that Krishna and his pastimes, they're very difficult to understand. And even the demigods are bewildered by Krishna and his apparent transgressive activities. And it's also understood, you know, that in order to love somebody, you have to know them, right? And in order to develop trust, so that you can have these loving relations with somebody, you know, you have to know them and understand them, right? So it seems kind of like a catch-22, because Krishna kind of evades our understanding. His behavior appears to be transgressive. So how are we to trust, you know, and develop that love for Krishna when he's just so inscrutable?
Well, part of the transgressive nature of Krishna's activities, if we're talking about Krishna particularly, is that everything is arranged to increase that love, that trust. It's like those trust falls that you have in team building exercise or something like that, exercises. They always catch you. I mean, nobody's going to go step back and put their hands up in the air and say, ha ha ha, I fooled you. I've never seen that happen. But the whole deal is the other person, they have to put a little bit of trust in you. Even though their eyes are closed, they don't know whether you're really there or not, but they're going to lean back And they're going to get to that tipping point, and they have to let go. They have no choice but to completely give themselves to. So there's always going to be an element of mystery. And even if we spend decades living with somebody, I was married for 40 years, but there's still a lot of things about her that I didn't understand, and no doubt plenty of things about me that she just didn't get, like, what planet is this character from? But still, there was trust, and the trust grew, and it particularly grows as we get to know each other better. So, one of the aspects of bhakti is sharanagati, the path of taking shelter, the path of giving trust to Krishna. And maybe first we kind of have to take him at his word and know that even if he leaves us high and dry, as he does, right?
Yeah, so that's the trust issue.
That's just really there to fan the flames of our love and just to make us a little crazier about him. And him a little crazier about us. When he sees that, he goes, oh, cool. It's, that's really all about increasing love. And that's experienced by those entities as a kind of pleasure. And what makes it special is its intensity, just like the gopis love. What makes it special is its intensity. And I'm really appreciating, there's this kind of like theme in my life starting yesterday evening, because our friend Mindy comes to our Nectar of Devotion classes in the evenings, and she, yesterday, rather than starting out with me listening to my own voice, I asked the other devotees participating to share what they had on their minds about the things that we were reading. And she had actually been reading a little about Lord Chaitanya. She found Lord Chaitanya on Google, and she's trying to figure out who's Lord Chaitanya. And the reason she's trying to figure out who's Lord Chaitanya, she shared this with us so mind-blowingly simple and amazing. She says, I just want to know Krishna better. She says, I'm here because I want to know Krishna better. And I said, well, if you want to know Krishna better, Lord Chaitanya is the right place to go. Because that's his deal too. He's Krishna trying to figure himself out, trying to figure out things about himself he didn't know were there. So that's just a wonderful thing. But when we look at the 6 angas of Sharanagati, what we see is, first of all, we have to give a little bit. We have to accept the things that are favorable for culture and bhakti and neglect things that aren't. And then we have to have some trust that Krishna will provide for us, that he'll protect us in all circumstances. Rakshashatiti vishvasaha. We have to have this conviction that Krishna will protect us in all circumstances. And then even deeper, and this is like the root anga of those 6 different aspects of surrender, the absolute knowledge, absolute dependence on Krishna to provide whatever it is we need. Whether it's to provide sustenance, whether it's to provide good company, whether it's to provide faith in him, or whatever. But even that comes from him. And then give up, with that conviction, give up all separate interest, atma-nivedana. Then we can just completely let go. Then we can do that trust fall. And we find ourselves in the other person's arms, humbled by that experience that we know we can trust. So it's a process, and it's a constant exercise. Now, one of the things that gets in a lot of very thoughtful folks' way, even thoughtful devotees' way, is, well, if he's all powerful and he's all good, what's all this stuff about? I mean, I can remember when I wasn't old and broken down. I can remember a time when there wasn't a pandemic. I was going to say I can remember a time when we weren't on the verge of revolution in this country, but maybe not. I mean, that's kind of what we did 50 odd years ago. Tear down the walls, right? But we remember, we can remember when things were better. Things were always pretty sucky, but so that sometimes is a little challenging, and so some things we, at least for the interim, we have to go with a sense of mystery, just like. We were remembering the other day, Srila Prabhupada says in his introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, if you want to actually understand Bhagavad Gita, you have to begin by accepting, at least theoretically, that Krishna is who he says he is. Prabhupada says unequivocally, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But then he says, so if you really want to understand what the Bhagavad Gita is about, then you have to accept that, at least theoretically. Let that be the lens through which you read the Bhagavad Gita, then it'll make some sense. And that was actually my experience. I hadn't been able to make sense of the Bhagavad Gita. When I read that, I thought, oh, okay, I can do that, I can try that. Took a little practice, but I was able to kind of, get in the groove. So, yeah, to know him is to love him, and trust and love kind of seem to come together. Maybe in a symbiotic way, maybe not. I'm not exactly sure. Love is a mystery. Trust is a mystery. It's all a mystery to a simpleton like me. But I don't know. Maybe does that help a little bit?
It does. Thank you so much.
Anything else? Try as I might, I'm still over. Thank you so much. Grantaraja Srimad Bhagavatam.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.